Right, so we are recording.
Brilliant.
This is John with his smiley mug, and it's John L.
Will
Mockett.
people see my smiley mug, or is it a podcast kind of thing? I guess it's more of a podcast thing, huh?
Well, so far it's a video thing, but it could be.
Oh, is it? Oh, cool. People
So
will
it could
see
be
my smiley mug.
any of the above. So for those, if this is a podcast for some people, John is holding a smiley emoji mug. Anyway, so John L. Mockett, who many people listening to this may know already. I'd like to call you a friend and mentor.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we go back a few years now. I'm not even sure. I first reached out to you, I think, about 2015.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
About that right?
Yeah.
For some one-to-one coaching, which I have to say, in fact, I don't know if you remember this, John, but after our first session in London, it stopped relatively earlier than scheduled, I believe. And do you remember why? Not that you have to remember why. I'm not putting you on the spot, but I basically you sort of short-circuited my brain.
I do remember you saying that. Yeah.
I just ended up in this really kind of tripped out place, and I remember thinking, driving home, oh my gosh, I'm so trippy. I'm going to have to be careful. So yeah, that's. Yes, go see John. He short circuits your brain. How's that for a testimonial?
Okay, that's certainly one way of putting it.
No, in all seriousness, it was quite a transformative experience of changing perception, which hasn't left. I mean, my perception is changing all the time, but that understanding and that knowledge and that what you gave me in that session has persisted. That is not to say that I do not go up in my head. I regularly go up in my head, but the connection to that remains, which I thank you for.
Oh, not at all, no.
But we've connected since then as well, haven't we, on Super Coach, and then more latterly the 6-month shadow mentorship.
Which we didn't have a name for the entire 6 months that I ran that program.
Yeah. I remember.
It was literally in the unknown, that program, and then became a program that I called Into the Unknown.
You latterly felt it needed to have a name with as little description as possible, and it became something in the unknown, comfort or into the unknown.
Into the unknown, yeah. Which might seem like a bit of a cop-out, but it also seems like it was very relevant to what we did in that 6 months. So that's why I left it as I did. So,
yeah. And so really, I mean, the premise behind this conversation we're having now was around, your experience of where you've got to with 3 principles, and if you want to, a little bit about where you were before, but that's not necessary. Really what you wanted to convey about your experience of the 3 principles and how it's impacted you and what you're doing now. Over to you, really, John.
Yeah. Well, I will share a bit of the background, actually, because I think it's relevant. I mean, the thing that I'm feeling is fresh to talk about at the moment is this whole idea of how it doesn't look to me like we have to cope anymore. And, before I learned stuff about the principles, before I became exposed to it, my whole life was about trying to cope. It was about trying to cope with how I felt, both emotionally and physically. It was about trying to cope with the fact that I didn't know what was going to happen. It was about trying to cope with the whole idea of not knowing in general. It just seemed to me that every time I said the words "I don't know," that looked to me like a cue for me to start thinking about things and figuring things out, so that I could know the answer. But the problem the problem became that I never really got to a place where I had answered all of the I don't knows. Right. So actually there was this constant feeling of angst and anxiety and worry and concern, because the minute I'd figure something out, I'd have another problem. So I'd go and try and figure that out, and then I'd have another problem. and I'd feel more and more anxious as a result. So I'd then try and cope with all of those feelings of anxiety. So I'd learned lots and lots of stuff. I'd done a lot of personal development, which was all for me about trying to cope with my experience. And also I'd done a lot of things to try and cope with the health struggles that I'd had. So, you know, constantly seeing doctors and researching and trying new things. And, you know, I don't want to talk too much about the health stuff because there's so much stuff out there that I've done already. I can point people to resources about that if they want to learn about it. But, you know, it had really looked to me for a long time before I became exposed to the principles that life was really about coping and knowing everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I did a really bad job of coping, and I never got to the point where I knew everything.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't really working very well. And then as I learned about the principles, and I began to see that, you know, we lived in this thought created experience. We weren't living in a circumstance created experience. I began to see my ups and downs of my experience more for what they were. So rather than being things that needed to be fixed and sorted out, you know, all the external circumstances of my life, they just became experiences that were normal and human, right? So it became possible to experience anxiety and it not be a problem, and it not be data about my life or something that had to be figured out. It became actually possible for me to experience some of the symptoms that I had, knowing that actually what was causing them was the constant worry and concern that I was living in all of the time. Right? They no longer seemed unsafe anymore. And what I began to see was the more it didn't look like I needed to cope with my experience, it also didn't seem like I needed to know all of the answers anymore. So I could actually sit in not knowing and that be okay, because I wasn't any longer feeling like the discomfort that I was going through when I was not knowing answers. It didn't look like that discomfort was any longer a problem. Now, what I also began to see was that space of not knowing was in fact incredibly powerful, not something that needed to be, you know, fixed. It was actually the place of potential. And so as I began to relax about some of the symptoms I was experiencing and some of my emotional experience, I actually found that in that space, I started to heal. And that was sort of my first major insight around, you know, this principle's understanding, was that when I'm more at peace with my experience, there is actually an intelligence that is operating in this formless unknown that is responsible for healing my body. And that's exactly what it did. So I went from having had this kind of 7-year illness to a couple of weeks later pretty much being symptom free.
Wow.
As a result of, you know, not needing to fight my experience or figure out the unknown. Wow. And that was interesting to me. And I became, well, it was more than interesting to me. It was life changing at the time. But it was also in some ways incredibly ordinary, which is kind of strange, but it was like, rather than someone, you know, reveal something fantastically amazing that I didn't know was there, it was like I just had remembered something was there.
Yes. Yeah.
So it was also incredibly ordinary as well. And so as this sort of began to take shape in me, and I began to sort of get better from, you know, this 7 years of being unwell, I also began to sort of get curious about whether this sort of formless unknown was actually at work in other areas of my life too. And I began to see that the less I needed to figure out, you know, things when I didn't know the answers, well, apparently that space of the unknown became a place where answers came forward. became a place of creativity, became a place of problem solving, became a place of decision making. And how that tended to show up was I was just kind of walking around a lot more settled in myself because I was realizing I didn't actually need to get anywhere to be okay. So there was so much more room in my mind than there ever was, and so much less of me trying to figure out what to do with things. And I just started to find that I had this creativity that seemed to naturally and ordinarily flow through me. Again, it didn't feel like something spectacular. It just felt ordinary. You know, I was kind of living my life and going, oh, well, I need to do this, and oh, and I need to do that. And I just found myself being moved by life to do things in relation to my work and in relation to my parenting and in relationship to, you know, my relationships with other people. It just became so much more effortless. And what I saw was it had always looked to me like living in noise in my head was a prerequisite for being able to live life. And what I was actually beginning to wake up to was, oh, you can kind of live without so much of that stuff going on in your head, and life still goes on. You still do things.
The world still turns.
The world still turns, even if John isn't even in his head. And I genuinely thought that it worked the other way. I thought that if I stopped living in the noise of my head, that what was going to happen to me was I was going to lie on a couch and, you know, eat junk food and watch Netflix 24 hours a day. You know, and to be fair, I can sometimes sit and watch junk food and watch Netflix, but it isn't like, you know, the major part of my life. I get up, I look after my kids, I shower and I shave and I work and I do things. But I'm not sitting there in the illusion anymore that I need to make myself do all of that. This deeper intelligence that lives our life, that beats our heart, that digests our food, that helped me to recover, well, it dwells in that space of the unknown, and it's actually working seamlessly all the time, right? So I can go from the nothingness of that to the knowingness of something to do effortlessly.
Yes. It's funny what you're talking about. I'm listening to you and so many things are bubbling up. The expression knowledge is power comes to mind. And I think in the corporate world, you know, that's perhaps not said openly, but, you know, people see it as a truth that knowledge is power. And what you're talking about is almost the inverse of that, in that, and I'll qualify that because there's a lot to that. There's a lot to explore there, but it would seem on the surface, superficially, I think most people would grasp onto the fact that it's obvious that the more you know, the more you intellectualize, the more you analyze, the more you use your intellect. That's the leverage point. I think that's a corporate, and that's a kind of almost corporate truth. Superficially, that's what looks real to a lot of people. Yeah. And that's not what you're saying here at all. You're saying the inverse of that. Yeah. Well, I'm not someone who thinks for one moment that you don't need to acquire knowledge. I mean, you and I both know there are certain things that you've got to just know certain facts about in order to be able to do things. So, you know, you can't fly a plane unless you know the physics of flight and what the controls do. You know, in relation to that, it's probably not going to end very well if you just jump in a cockpit and hope for the best and trust that in the moment you'll know what to do. I don't think that works that way. Not recommended. No. Not recommended. No. but at the same time, we can be so bound up in what we think we know that we miss the freshness and creativity of the moment. And that's the thing, is that it's good to acquire knowledge, but it's good to see that actually fresh and in the moment knowledge is often more useful than
a lot of what we've known from our past experience. So we can't get too caught up in what we think we know, because every situation we're going into is going to be different on some level to what we've experienced before.
Mm-hmm.
So we need freshness
Mm-hmm.
in order to know how to show up in that situation. And if we're too attached to the old, well, what worked then, who knows that that's going to work now?
Yeah, and when you described how you, I mean, these are my words, so you correct them if they're not appropriate to you, but it's just how you described the before, if you like, the before John, where you would reach for that, for what you knew or what you thought you knew, and analysed it, and then turned it over and looked at it a different way, and then had another look and asked someone else, and that got you down a rabbit hole of a rabbit hole, Warren, that you knew. But you didn't know there was another one somewhere else. No, that's probably stretching the metaphor a little bit too far. But it was then there was probably some comfort in going down that rabbit hole, I suppose, up to a point. It's familiar, you've been there before, but it wasn't getting you where, wasn't moving you forward.
No, I think a lot of what I was trying to do in that thinking about stuff was to try and convince myself that I really knew what was going on. And then in convincing myself, I would then settle down and experience some comfort.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I delude myself that I really knew what was going on, and then I could go, oh, I'm okay. Well, how that's kind of changed now is that it doesn't look to me like uncomfortable feelings are problematic anymore. And in seeing that, I see that actually I do less of the figuring out stuff to try and be comfortable, but it doesn't seem to have stopped me from figuring things out. It's just that the figuring out is a natural mechanism built into the mind. It's the kind of thing that you and I experience when, let's assume you and I have a problem, or we have a problem, and we try and figure it out. And then at some point you get to a point where you go, well, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is going to be. And you give up.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then you find yourself one day having an idea that pops into your head, even though you're not thinking about that problem.
Yep.
Well, that's this natural intelligence that's built into the mind that we don't pay attention to or see is there.
Yeah.
Now, I thought that those answers only came at the end of me figuring stuff out.
Yes.
What I accidentally fell into was the realization that I could stop trying to figure things out because I'm now comfortable with my experience in the unknown. But hey, life is still doing that figuring out thing and bringing me insight when I need it. Oh, good. Okay. So that doesn't turn me into, somebody that doesn't function anymore. It just means that I function and I have a much easier and more effortless experience of being alive and of navigating whatever challenges that life throws in my way. And it's easier because the thing that takes it away from being easier is not knowing the natural problem solving is there.
Yeah.
And not seeing that the suffering is caused by living so much in our thinking. And getting involved in that noise as if it's somehow data or information when it's not, it's just noise.
And I think what you've just said there is that knowing that you're living in your thinking might be an expression that to a lot of people who haven't come across the three principles will be one of those, what did you say? Moments, living in your thinking. What I mean, I don't suppose a lot of people who've not come across the principles would even think of that as a thing. Like
No.
there's something in between your experience and the real world. I mean, people.
That's right.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people would, as you said earlier, you felt you didn't realize you were living in your thinking, not the environment, your circumstances. And I think that bears repeating, because that's life changing for a lot of people. Realizing that.
hugely. I mean, that was why I was constantly trying to change my life in order to have a nicer experience of being alive.
Mm.
And I never got there.
So you need, so all this striving for bigger houses and nicer cars and whatever your made up version.
Didn't get there.
Oh.
No, I mean, my version was nicer health.
Yeah.
You know, I was trying to have a healthier life and to not be afflicted by symptoms. And yeah, I suffered every day. And it looked like it was coming from the symptoms, but actually I started to glimpse that there were times when I could have an experience of being okay, even when there were symptoms.
Yeah.
And that started to make me question whether the symptoms were really causing me suffering, or whether there was a mediator in between that was creating that sense of suffering. And the mediator, as you're pointing out, is thought, right? I was living, excuse me, 24 hours a day. Well, my waking hours at the very least. I wasn't awake 24 hours a day, but certainly my waking hours, I was living in fearful thoughts about what was going to happen, and, you know, what the symptoms meant, and how I was going to get rid of them all. And I was really thinking, oh, yeah, when I get rid of symptoms, then I'll be okay.
Yeah.
Well, every single day that looked true, I never felt okay.
Yeah.
Except in those moments when organically, for a few moments, I wasn't thinking about symptoms, and then I'd be settled again. Now, it took being pointed in the direction of the principles and understanding more of how our experience works for me to begin to clock and get eyes for the fact that there actually were these moments where I had symptoms and was okay.
Yeah.
So I started to get really curious. Well, how is that? How does that work? Well, that works because your suffering is not coming from the symptoms. It's coming from you being in your thinking.
Yeah.
You paying attention to your thinking as if it's true, as if it's data, as if it's actually something you've got to account for in order to be okay. Plan for, right.
Yeah.
And I was doing that with my health. Other people do it in terms of their bank balance, or they do it in terms of their relationships, or their career, or whatever else. Their mind is always making up stuff that appears to be telling you what you need to do about your life. You then believe it to be true, and then go about trying to rearrange the furniture of your life. But the problem is that you never get to a point where it's organized, because your mind will make up 10 other criteria that you now need to go and figure out, which then puts you back into the suffering again.
Well, yeah, because it's like you're always trying to fix and mold and manipulate something that's subjective.
That's right. It's a moving goalpost all the time.
Pointless game. And I know, actually, I spoke with Gary Stein about this, and the title of his video was "Pain versus Suffering." In this specific, I know we're not talking necessarily about physical health, but it is a distinction between what you might say is relatively objective, be it physical pain or something physical in your life, and your experience of it. There's a distinction, and the distinction is that thought, and what you subjectively interpret about those things, and where you draw the line in terms of what's real and what's not. I don't know. That's beyond my pay grade, but
yeah, I mean, I can distinguish between the pain and suffering in terms of not only emotional pain and suffering, but in terms of physical pain and suffering too. I mean, last year I did something to my back that created more pain than I've ever experienced in my life. And I had this horrible kind of sciatic pain that went down my left leg, and I couldn't find a position that I was comfortable in. Now, the pain it was what it was, but it was definitely exacerbated by the fact that I got deluded by all the thinking I was having about what that pain meant.
Yeah.
So,
rabbit hole again.
it was the rabbit hole. So I started getting caught up in the, oh God, how are you going to be able to do your work? And you've got all these responsibilities and you've got this talk to do here and you've got to fly here and you've got that responsibility to cope with. And what about your kids and all the jobs to do that? And I'm getting more and more and more lost in that. And it looking more and more urgent for me to do something about this pain. And all that did was create more pain, because the physiology of that is that when I'm living in all of that thinking and feeling like there's something to resist, that triggers a fight or flight response in my body, which creates more tension, more inflammation, more oxidative stress. Well, no wonder I was in such serious pain. And to be honest, it actually took a bit of time for me to see through that rabbit hole, because I'd made up all kinds of standards about how quick that thing should go. And it just wasn't going.
And I know, and I can remember when you were having this. I wasn't there all the time, but I know when you talked about it at the time. I suspect also that there's an element in there of, well, I know this stuff. I should.
Oh Lord, yes, that was going on. Yeah, I mean, it was news to me almost that the same thing that had bluffed me when I was sick for those 7 years was now the same thing that was bluffing me when I had back pain.
Yeah, got you again.
But it didn't look like it at the time. It was like, no, there's actually something physically wrong with me now. And I was like, and then maybe there was. I mean, I did have an MRI scan that showed something, but it's really interesting. Like if you look at people who have back pain and disc herniations, which is what they told me I had. Well, you can MRI large parts of the population, and many of those people will have herniated discs and won't have any symptoms.
Yeah.
And, I had a herniated disc and had symptoms, but I also noticed that as I started to drop out of the fearful thinking that I had about what that pain meant, my experience of pain became a lot less and actually a lot more transient at times too. So I can see that a lot of what was definitely revving up that pain was the meaning I was making up about it.
Yeah, I know for myself, when I experience pain, there's a world of difference between being in pain and then projecting forward how long that's going to last. And you know what? I think also we tend to associate pain with something negative. And I'm not saying that we want to invite pain.
No.
But, there is, I've slightly shifted my view on this, in that I feel like there's wisdom in pain too. There's sometimes it is trying to tell us something. We may misinterpret it. We may not welcome it and invite it. But I think the difference is, from what you're describing, is having pain and then analysing that to death and inferring and interpreting and getting so caught up in what it means, rather than just going, oh, I've got pain.
I'm in pain. Yeah.
And I'll be curious. What's curious? What's going to happen next? What perhaps is my body trying to tell me? Don't know right now. Maybe I'll know at some point. Maybe I'll never know.
Yeah.
And there's a real difference in the weight, or how that feels. There's, it's much lighter and responsive and curious.
Yeah. And it's also very human to have pain.
Yeah.
I mean, it's part of being alive, and I don't know. I mean, I don't know if pain is telling me something specific I need to learn or see, or I don't know. Maybe it is, but the only thing I would caution about that is that people can end up like hearing that. And I certainly have at times. I remember reading a book called "You Could Heal Your Life," or I think it was Louise Hay's book, and there was a bit at the end which tried to relate physical ailments with unresolved kind of aspects of your life, and I remember going through that and going, oh well, look, this symptom means this, so I've got to resolve this and got to resolve that, and actually it made me really busy
Yeah.
trying to figure it out. So I'm not saying you're wrong, but it's good to see that actually, well, look, we get in pain. And we don't always know why, but the figuring out of that is not actually where it's at. We might learn something about what it means later on, but if we get involved in trying to now analyze it and figure it out, again, we've gone down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, I think I agree with, I completely agree with what you're saying. I guess for me, it's just a shift in from it's down to me to fix this. And as you say, you know, there's a world difference from what does this say about me and what am I doing wrong versus, oh, well, I have pain. And if it occurs to me, I think that's the difference. It's a bit like we were talking about with when you're learning new stuff, when, you know, having skills that are applicable. When you pick up a tool set or a skill set from a place of inspiration, and the same with this, if it occurs to you that you have this pain and there's something that just is naturally obvious to do, there's a world of difference from that than right, well, is it this? Is it that? Is it, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the place from which you are curious. How you are curious. Are you curious from a sense of lightness and or is it a place is there somewhere to go to fix, to get
That's
to?
it. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think what allows that lightness is when we see that lightness is our nature.
Yeah.
Right. So lightness is we take ourselves away from lightness to the extent to which we think it's our job to get somewhere and figure out how we're going to do that.
Yeah.
Right. So that lightness of touch, it shows up the more we wake up to the fact that that's how we're built to be.
Yeah.
Right? We may not live there all the time because as humans, we are going to get lost in our head and forget it and go to sleep to it. That's part and parcel of the human condition. But it's one thing to know that you're going to do that, knowing that that's okay and that at some point you'll settle down and come back to that place of lightness.
Mm-hmm.
And it's another thing to do that thinking that if you do that thinking enough and that figuring out and analyzing stuff enough, that somehow you're going to get to that place of lightness. Well, that's as weird as trying to, you know, that's as weird as going to a rock concert and then going, right, I'm in the rock concert. Where's the quietest place in here right now? Like, whatever you do.
The rock concert.
Yeah, just don't go in there in the first place.
Which draws me back to what you said towards the beginning around this. When you first came across this, you again, and I will probably not quite remember the right way, so do stop me, of feeling that, you know, with this understanding, with this ordinary paradigm shift, that and I can see my dog walking off with the mail, which probably means he's going to eat it. But anyway, I'll deal with that in a minute.
Keeping it real here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We're in the real world. We're definitely having real experience or real circumstances. So I was struck by, and this was my experience too, when I described the only description I had was you short-circuited my brain. This dropping out of this busy and resting in this unknown, or being in the unknown and feeling comfortable with the unknown. And I think you described it probably in a different way to me, but my description was, oh my goodness, well, you know, I feel, is this apathy, or is this, you know, what this not having to do anything, that the lightness with, as you just described, could feel, I mean, it feels wonderful, but can you speak to that lightness and that
Well, there's a couple of things that strike me about your example just then, which was, the first thing that struck me was you felt that spacey lightness, short-circuitedness, but apparently it didn't stop you getting in your car and driving home.
No.
Right? Now, that's interesting to observe, because how else might that work in your life?
Yes.
How else might it be possible to live in that place and it not compromise your ability to function, whether that's at work, whether that's at, you know, in your day-to-day life and getting the jobs done that you need to do. That's the thing. And yet it's unfamiliar, and it can actually feel threatening to people at first, especially if they've lived their entire life like I had. Like I'd been taught, well, you've got to be on it and you've got to figure it out and you've got to know what you're doing with things. Well, okay. Yeah, so I can be really busy trying to do all of that stuff, but apparently it works really well, it seems, when I don't do that as well. And it doesn't, to me, it might seem like apathy. It's actually not. It's more of an engaged presence. It's more of a seeing that the freshness of the moment is where my best insight is going to come from. So I can get lost in my head, which is mostly made of projections and memory thoughts. But the things that are going to be most valuable to me are the thoughts and the movement, the knowingness that comes through me moment to moment to moment in that space of engaged presence. I mean, you can watch sportsmen and their game goes off the minute they start getting lost in projections of the game,
Right.
you know, going a certain way. Yeah. And it goes off because now they're starting to live in their head. They're not actually present to the game. They're playing a game that's been constructed in their head.
Oh yeah, I can relate to that. Not I'm no sportsman or sportswoman, but I can relate. I can relate to that. And I'm when I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about all these busy people, maybe in corporate land, trying very hard, gaining knowledge. And then contrasting that with people showing up in the corporate world with engaged presence and, as you described it, and the lightness and the confidence to listen to those nudges and knowing and the amount of capacity that must afford them and responsiveness.
Right. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because being engaged and present in the moment, you can be nudged to go and get knowledge.
Yes, as we were saying.
So it's not that everything is going to come.
Yeah.
No, not at all. It's just that going through old knowledge is not necessarily the source of freshness. Right. So you can be engaged in the moment, and look, we've got all the knowledge we need at our hands these days. We just need to go on Google and you've got the knowledge. Right. But it doesn't have to be the default that we get knowledge first before we get freshness. It's like, actually, the freshness of the moment will encourage us and help us to know what to do moment to moment to moment. Sometimes that is go and read up what was done in the past. Sometimes it's like, no, we need something new.
Oh my goodness, the power in that. And a few examples are coming to mind, one in aviation, but in general, you know, you see it in fact, in a funny kind of way. It sort of happens already, you know, in a non-3P sense, if you want to put it that way. You know, you sometimes get consultants into companies to look at things with fresh eyes. It's not that what the guys there are doing is wrong necessarily, but just having a fresh pair of eyes is a similar way of saying, you know, let's get some fresh insight. Let's drop out of this what we know and what we've done and what is familiar and looks like it's giving us comfort, and let's see the world through a new set of eyes. But we don't need to necessarily have someone external do that. Once we understand how our own human system works most effectively, then we can see that for ourselves.
Yeah, we can come from freshness. I mean, what was occurring to me as you said that was sometimes where I'm most in danger in my own work of going off track is where I've worked with people who have a specific label and I think I know what I'm doing with those people. Right? So I do work with a lot of people who have health concerns and chronic fatigue and that sort of thing. And I have quite a lot of knowledge around that. And that's a problem sometimes because it can mean that I could go into a session with somebody, and if I get so enamored with what I think, or they tell me something and I make a connection, what I think I know already, there's a danger that I'm not going to be as fresh with them. And it doesn't happen often, but it's become something I'm well aware of. Like, there's a feeling almost of, when I think, oh yeah, I really know what I'm doing here, I actually get really suspicious with myself. I'm like, maybe you do. Yeah. Maybe you don't. Stay open, stay curious, stay fresh.
Yeah.
Because you might see it's not what you think.
It's funny, and this might be slightly going off track, but as you're speaking, I'm reminded of parenting. It reminds me of, as the older person, as the parent, it's so easy to think, I've seen this before. I know this is what you need to do. And of course, we're relying on our own experience and our own of our own lives, our own childhood, which was a long time ago, and responsive to what circumstances were happening then. And then it's so easy as a parent to go, this is what you need to do. That's a whole separate topic to talk about for hours, but that wisdom, that freshness, that insightfulness, as you say, and that engaged presence is, whilst it's probably a paradigm shift in the way people look at, I don't know, personal development, whatever you want to call it, as you say, it's so ordinary. It's in everyone.
Yeah.
And that's the wonder and the ease. It's so powerful, yet it's so simple and so apparently obvious when you see it.
That's what I mean about it being ordinary. Because when you actually start to get eyes for it, it's like, oh, well, yeah, of course. Because on some level, we know it.
Yeah.
Like, I say this example a lot, but it really speaks to me. Like, I don't generally think about what time I'm going to the bathroom, but apparently I go there. I know to go. And at some point I'll go, oh, I need to go to the loo. And I just go to the loo. Well, it strikes me that that's how most things seem to work. And it's just that we've overlaid meaning on what we do. And we've forgotten that knowingness seems to operate all the time. So the more meaning there is that lying on what we do, the more we'll start to overthink all of this stuff. And then we'll occasionally start, thinking that there's value in that overthinking in terms of us in terms of us knowing what to do. But actually, what if it all was as simple as we're living in the moment, and that greater intelligence that works our body and seems to do a pretty good job of making things happen? Well, what if that can help you build a business? What if that can help you solve a problem? What if that can help you make a decision? What if that can help you negotiate a conflict without the need for all of that crazy noise that we get involved in our head? And all it takes is for people to look. And my experience tells me is when people start to look, they actually start to get eyes for that.
Yeah.
They see, oh yeah, there's this time when I wasn't thinking about this, but I just knew what to do. Or like as a parent, how many of us, you get suddenly this little breathing thing in your hands and you haven't got the first clue what to do.
No.
But yet, apparently we muddled through.
Well, I know experience with my two. I mean, the first child, I'd read all the books, I'd done all the prep, and the baby was going to eat then and sleep then, and they were going to do this, and they were going to. I had it all figured out.
Yeah.
And of course, I didn't get the kind of baby that did that.
Exactly.
And so she hadn't read the same books that I had.
Damn.
So
she didn't get the note in the womb.
No. And then I thought, so I threw that. It took me quite a while. Actually, I did hold on to what was supposed to happen for quite a while. And at some point, obviously, I just threw that out and just, well, this is ridiculous. I'm too tired to stick to this. And then the second child came along, and she probably would have read the books, but she was the second child, so she was just fitting in with everyone anyway. But it's funny,
Yeah.
isn't it? We kind of operate like we're some sort of mystic Meg, and we kind of know how the world's going to be, and it's, we know what, we've got some sort of crystal ball, but that isn't where the I don't want to use the word leverage. It sounds, but anyway,
Freshness for me. It's freshness.
Yeah, that's not where the freshness and the insight and the where it's at. And so this, being or going into the unknown, knowingly going into the unknown, is actually where is that place of both lightness and connection, but also where it becomes obvious the next steps. And you can hear my dog barking.
I can hear the dog barking. Yeah, mine hasn't started yet. But...
He's not read the book either.
No. I mean, I was thinking, I loved what you were just sharing about, we had all the baby books too. And a great example of, I must get the knowledge. I must know how to bring up my kid. Well, okay, get all these books, and these wonderful books tell you, by this time of, by this number of months, your kid should be sleeping through the night, this number of hours, and you should be feeding them this many bottles and this much, breastfeeding and all of that sort of stuff. And
been exhausted already listening. Yeah.
Well, exactly. Yeah. But you're a new parent, and you innocently think, well, yeah, these other people must know better than me. So you get all these books. And I remember just going, what is this? Did I just get the wrong baby, or did we get the wrong baby? Or because Max was he didn't sleep.
Yeah.
And he ate more than anybody I've ever come across.
Yeah. Yeah.
He was putting on 1 pound a week, and we couldn't feed him enough.
Wow.
And I remember one night, in the middle of the night, we were, he wasn't sleeping, and we were exhausted, and we were going through all these baby books and going, well, look, he should be doing this and he's not doing that. Now that knowledge had now become a trap for us. Yeah. And I remember we took all the books and I threw them in the bin, and we just started trusting our instincts. We just started doing what we need to do. Yeah. And our anxiety levels went down. And I noticed Max's anxiety levels seemed to go down as well. And we just started doing what made sense to us. And we were not suffering so much for somebody's other standard of knowledge giving us an idea about how it should be. We were actually in the freshness of the unknown, but also a greater place of well-being for not having all of that thinking.
And I can only imagine your experience of having Max shifted massively to a place of enjoyment and curiosity and wonder. I'm going to have to can I just let the dog out? I'm going to do something I've not done before. I'm going to pause us briefly.
Pause us.
All right, hold on. So, sorry, the dog obviously hadn't read the book either. He just needed to nip out to the loo. And I've just
dog dealt with.
Dog dealt with. But I had a similar experience with my daughter. I mean, she hadn't read the book. She wasn't going to do whatever this particular author had said. But, I was still exhausted and tired, like I'm sure you and Linda were. But suddenly I was seeing the world through her eyes more and listening to her wisdom and actually responding to what she was asking, in the way that she only knew how. And like I say, second child was a different child and probably would have been much more placid and compliant. But that's not actually where it's at anyway.
I mean, what I love about what just happened was you and I didn't really particularly think about, well, what's going to happen when your dog, excuse me, losing my voice now, when your dog suddenly starts woofing in the middle of our talk.
Yeah.
Apparently, at some point, we noticed it was happening, and you said, "Oh, I'm going to pause the recording and go deal with the dog and come back."
Yeah.
See, great example. We know what to do, but we only seem to know, from my experience, in the moment.
Yeah.
I don't think we can often figure it out in advance.
No. Well, because it's that crystal ball thing again. I mean, I was thinking, right, well, I know the dog's chewing the post. I know he's just had a drink. He probably wants to go out for a wee. I need to have that going on in the background a little bit. Well, at some point I'm either going to have to stop and go and deal with it, or he'll have done a whittle on the floor when I finish the call, and there'll be a pile of ripped letters.
Mail.
There are some ripped letters.
Oh
but he has
gosh.
to whittle on the floor. But hey, it's, as you say, you can respond in the moment to. I think so often we just expect to know, as you say, we expect that we've got the answers before we've got them.
Right. And people might say, "Oh, is that a trust thing?" And I'm like, I think it just takes looking to see how it works.
Yeah.
Right. So it doesn't so much look to me like it's about trust. It's just I started to notice, oh yeah, well, I do seem to know in the moment. But it's worth clarifying, I think, that this is not saying, oh, right, well, if I stay engaged and present in the moment, then I'll always know what to do and everything's going to work out and be fabulous.
Mm.
Because look, here you are, some of your mail's ripped up, right?
Hey, yeah, it's not the end of the world, but yeah.
Exactly. But it's worth saying, okay, yeah, sometimes things don't work out the way you want them to be.
Oh, yeah.
And that's a truth about the human condition.
Right. I think, and the distress comes from having an idea that it should look a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it's not, either beating yourself up or not literally beating someone else up, but the discomfort, the angst, the anxiety, the anger, whatever, usually negative emotions, if it's not gone the way we want them to go, that's all that is. But when you see that, then it's easier just to, for me, it's like dropping into a space of gratitude for what is rather than fighting it, because it doesn't look so much like it's me that's got to fix or change.
Yeah.
Anything.
I think we often think that, well, I certainly did, that my constant analysis and trying to figure stuff out was going to prevent, in inverted commas, bad stuff from happening. Well, it doesn't look like it worked that way. In fact, I can definitely see in my health situation that was actually detrimental to my health. That was actually making me sick. Now, dropping out of so much of that thinking hasn't taken away the fact that I'm human and sometimes life doesn't work out the way I want it to. But it does mean that I'm able to be more engaged and present and react to that in the best way I possibly can.
Yeah.
And it does mean also that even when those things happen and I end up feeling bad, because that happens too, because I know that feeling isn't because of that thing going wrong. It's just that my mind has got upset. My mind has got a disconnect between the way it wanted it to be versus the way it's turned out to be. But knowing that the nature of my mind is it's built to settle. Oh, there's the dog again. It's built to settle. It's built to come back home. So I don't need to be upset about the fact that I'm upset. I just need to know at some point I won't be upset anymore.
And that's the world of difference.
It's life-changing. Because now you're free to be human.
Just show up.
Yeah.
So, John, before the dog destroys my house completely, which I think he's all right, he won't. But I'm so conscious.
He's a very cute dog, though.
He is very cute, but most naughty dogs are. That's how they get away with being naughty, in my experience. So yeah, and I'm conscious of your time too, because I know we're coming to the end of the time we had together. Yeah. So you're going to do another one of these courses, I believe, aren't you? That you've done with us. And what are you going to call it this time?
Well, it's been called Into the Unknown.
All right.
So finally, after 6 months of running the first one, I actually came up with a name for it. Because when you were on it, it was just the 6-month program. And I never came up with a name for it. But then I came up with this name for it called Into the Unknown, because it just struck me that was essentially what we'd been playing with for 6 months. And I've split it up into kind of 3 modules. So there's 3 intensives. There's the first one, which is comfort in the unknown, which is all about settling down with our experience of not knowing and seeing that's okay. And then there's into the unknown, which is taking place in Lacona in Washington with George and Linda Pransky, where we will be very much exploring that space of the unknown and the potential of it. And then the final part of it is called sharing from the unknown, which is, you know, us settling down and seeing what comes to us to share, what we've seen over the 6 months that, you know, enables us to share more from that place as a group and to see the impact that that creates when we come from that place. So yeah, it's starting in June. And it's the end. I think it's the 28th of June that is the first intensive date. And that's, if people want to find out about that, it's at breakthroughtthat.com/ITU, I think.
Okay.
So,
all right.
Yeah.
Super. And can they find out about more of what you do, other things from that same website, or is there another?
Yeah, same website. Yeah, breakthroughtthat.com. All of the sort of information is on there. So, yeah.
Super. Well, I loved our chat. We've explored all. It's been lovely. Thank you very much, John.
Not at all. Completely from the unknown as well.
Completely from the unknown. We haven't rehearsed. There's no script.
I think they could probably tell that.
I think so. My dog is not that clever to be able to come in and, you know, steal the show halfway through.
Oh, no, it's been great fun, Katie. Thanks for having me on here. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you.
I've loved it. Thank you, John.
Pleasure.